Okay, so now I think I'm really looking forward to hearing the keynote for Alondra, who of course is no stranger to any one of you. Many of you in this room I keep looking at have been working with us on this field, and many of you, of course, been following what can be done. Alondra clearly is a leader in this area. She is right now the Harold Linder Professor at the Institute of Advanced Study in Princeton. Now, in 2021, first of all, before 21, I mentioned she was the co-chair of this initiative called CESTI. But in 2021 to 23, she was Deputy Assistant to President Joe Biden and the Acting Director of the White House Office of Science, Technology, and Policy, but also the Principal Deputy Director of Science and Society, which in fact is one of the new roles, if you will, in White House. So she's been able to bring a social science perspective, expertise into the work of science, technology, innovation. That's so important. She may talk about this. Certainly she led development of White House blueprint for AI Bill of Rights, which of course is critically important. It's part of President Biden's executive order on the safe, secure, and trustworthy development and the use of AI. Of course, she is now back as a scholar, private citizen, and we're trying to draw her back into this project. So you're truly one of the people who's best positioned, in my opinion, to give us an overview of what we're trying to do today. Alondra.
Okay, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I'm back, so you don't have to lure me back, Keith. I was sad to leave. It was one of, as glad as I was to go and have that time working in the White House, I was sad to leave CESTI because we were just like getting going. So good morning, everyone. It's great to see Tim and Hannah and the Keith K Squared and Deborah and colleagues that we started this work together and have been working together for a long time. And special greetings to you, Representative Foster. Thank you so much for being here. So, it's a special pleasure to return to think about the set of issues that I think all of us have been thinking about and that I, for a time, was working on here at the National Academies. I stepped away from this work with more than a little bit of regret, but in the intervening years, it's been really inspiring to see all of the work that's been done. Keith said almost 4 years of work, and of course the consensus study, which we know how much work that takes to accomplish. And so the framework, the Toward Equitable Innovation in Health and Medicine framework, I think makes a signal contribution to our collective thinking and understanding about how to align the design, development, and deployment of new and emerging technologies with issues of ethics and issues of equity. And the committee's resulting report describes a governance framework for decisions throughout the innovation lifecycle to advance equitable innovation and to support an ecosystem that's more responsive to the needs of a broader set of people and the American public. So I want to do, I guess, two things in my talk this morning. I want to go a little bit wider than the report and also drill down a little bit into the innovation ecosystem to think about the particular challenges that AI presents for the framework that they've presented to us. I'm going to talk about sort of three issues: 21st century science, technology, and innovation ecosystem, as opposed to a 20th century one, which I think in some ways undergirds the sort of assumptions of the framework a little bit. So I want to just sort of in a friendly way, ruffle feathers there. I want to talk about vis-a-vis the blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, what we might call an AI equity stack, taking the stack language from technology development, and then a concept that I've been working with called thick alignment that I think comes from the sort of AI safety community, but I want to bring back to this community because I think it's something that we need to take up seriously. All right, so I want to take us back to, so I got a little ahead of myself here. I want to take us back to Vannevar Bush and to Science, the Endless Frontier, right? Published in 1945. Among other things, Bush says that there's a role for the federal government in this science, technology, and innovation ecosystem, and that it has, in 1945, new responsibilities for promoting the creation of new scientific knowledge and the development of scientific talent in young people, science for social benefit, and the like. And you'll recall that part of what Science: The Endless Frontier does is carve out an explicit role for government in science, right? Bush argued that the federal government should fund scientific research, and particularly basic research, not aimed at specific applications, right? So very different from if you think about the sort of new tech directorate at NSF, it was a different moment. That would lead to long-term economic and social benefits, basic research as a foundation for government's investments, support for university research and institutions, so the sort of higher ed ecosystem that many of us emerge from comes out of this moment. Obviously, ultimately by 1950, the creation of the National Science Foundation, an understanding that there should be sort of applications of science and technology that should have some public benefit for safety and security vis-a-vis national security and national defense applications, and for public health and healthcare as well. And that these things together would help to spur economic growth and innovation. And he wraps up with a sort of acknowledgement of public and private sector collaboration, a kind of vision for what that is. I want to suggest this is what the piece that's fundamentally changed, and I think in a lot of our talking in CESTI, we talk about multi-sector, and I think that is exactly right, and Vannevar Bush laid some of that down for us, but we don't actually talk about the different pieces of the multi-sector that they're playing right now, and I think certainly Representative Foster and the end of his conclusion is kind of getting where I'm going. I mean, how do we think about the role of big industry and big technology in this multi-sector ecosystem that no longer has the particular constraints that we might, and I'll getting ahead of myself, but I'll get there. So what's different? So this is a famous slide I think some of you have seen from Mariana Mazzucato's book, 2015 book, The Entrepreneurial State, where she makes a very strong case for the role of the US federal government and the evolution of the iPhone. So she talks about all of the pieces that go into the evolution of the iPhone that come out of DARPA research, the Department of Energy, the Army Research Office, internationally places like CERN, Navy research, and the like. And so she's really making the case that, and there's another version of this that she even talks about colleagues at Google, Sergey Brin, and the other co-founder having NSF grants as graduate students at Stanford, right? So the big role of the federal government in the evolution of this sort of ecosystem that we have now. I want to suggest, and this goes a little bit to what Keith was saying, to what Victor was saying, which was really queuing up what I want to say, that also part of what enabled this was a parallel sort of ecosystem that stewarded the endless frontier, right? So that the frontier left unstewarded, untamed, is actually not good for the American public. And so alongside this, we might say, that rose up another kind of ecosystem. So not only the NSF in 1950, but all of the ways that we thought to steward, to make sure we were being accountable to the American public about how we do science and technology innovation, driven in large part by the federal government. So we can think about informed consent. We can think about peer review as part of this. Sort of how, one of the cases made for peer review is sort of how are we proving to the American public that we are responsibly stewarding their funds. Keith mentioned, Victor mentioned the Belmont report, obviously IRB, and the kind of larger domain of bioethics. So that's the kind of, I think, system that we're most familiar with thinking about, and I think that's the system that implicitly undergirds the framework that has recently been released. So I want to show you this new data. This is, I mean this to be kind of atmospheric. The data is very complicated. This is just one slide. There's lots to tease out. But this is from the National Science Board's Science Indicators report that comes out every 2 years. And I just want you to see the trend line that's been happening for the last 20 years on business investment and R&D. And I want to talk about the implications of that. So what we know from, this came out just in March, and many of you have already seen it, The United States remains the largest performer of research and development, over $806 billion in GDP expenditures in 2001. It's among the world's most R&D intensive economies, with expenditures in 2021 of equaling 3.5% of the GDP. President Biden also often talks about making sure we're above 2%, so here we have 3.5%, so that's in total. In 2021, business funded $130 billion in research, which represented 22% of total business funding for R&D, but 49% of total US funding for research. Business performed 77% of total US R&D. So the absolute amount of federally funded R&D increased, obviously, from 2000 to 2021. However, there was a significant growth in the R&D that was funded by business in the total share of US R&D. And the government funding decreased from 30% in 2011 to 19% in 2021. So the business sector now funds 36% of basic research, and close to 40% of the share of basic research is funded by the federal government. So again, the data is very complicated. You can go to the report. There's all sorts of, all of the background data is there. But I just want to suggest that, that we have been, I think, imagining as we talk about the innovation ecosystem, the model that Vannevar Bush gave us, and not the model actually that is really what we're living with right now. And that has implications for equity and for ethics issues, which are key to the report. We now have, if we think about, if AI is, I think as many of us believe, this sort of paradigmatic, sort of transformative shifting technology, we now have technology that, may have some elements of this. There was probably a role for DARPA, one can imagine, IARPA, other pieces, but is fundamentally coming out of the business sector. So this is a Stephen Levy article about the 2017 Google Transformer paper that led to generative AI, right? So 8 Google employees invented modern AI. Here's the inside story. So, maybe we had some NSF grants. I mean, one of the young people, Aiden Gomez, was, I think, like 19 or something. So, I don't think he had a kind of NSF career grant or graduate student grant. But, very young people, and really done this work for the most part in the private sector with private sector innovation, which is amazing. So I'm not trying to set up, something that is, putting these issues at cross purposes. But what this means is that we have lost some of what I think was the constraining, stewarding pieces of the ecosystem, right? Government no longer has control over, say, for example, peer review. So there's great innovation in publications right now, if you think about arXiv, and a lot of the really important generative AI papers, AI safety papers are coming out of our arXiv, pre-peer review. So there are sort of upsides, I think, and downsides to this curve. And we see, some of the downsides of not having, being able to fully steward innovation when it comes solely out of business, as Representative Foster said, with sort of business imperatives as a first principle. So these are just some headlines from the last year. Will AI benefit or harm workers? The health risks of generative AI-based wellness apps, 8 months pregnant and arrested after false recognition match, banks told to anticipate risks from AI, using AI machine learning, they fell in love with AI bots, and then a software update broke their hearts, and the like. And so there's been attempts, obviously, in Washington, including some of the work I did when I was working in the Biden-Harris administration, to begin to think about how government might respond in this new, broader, higher level ecosystem, in which it's no longer the principal funder, and therefore can no longer kind of set the rules of the road and the rules of behavior and standards and practice for how that research gets done. But hope is not lost. So I want to talk about, I think, a couple of pieces, I think, of policy innovation that I think are beginning to appreciate this shift in a way that government has been responding to this shift, although it's insufficient, I think, to the sort of big dynamic change that we see in the ecosystem of research funding. So, part of what I think the Biden-Harris administration has done is try to regulate and govern technology and science in a way to strategically provide investments that not only prevent harm, but also enhance people's lives. Case in point here is the CHIPS and Science Act. We are still waiting for most of the science money to be appropriated. But what is extraordinary about this massive piece of legislation is its commitments to equity and its commitments to rural communities, its commitments to tribal colleges, to historically Black colleges and universities. And so this is a way that government funding, although there's a lot, but literally tens of billions of dollars going to the private sector to really help us shift the semiconductor supply chain and move a lot of that innovation industry and jobs back to the United States. At the same time, Secretary Raimondo has gotten some flack for this. It is saying we need to provide childcare for workers or sort of help that be part of that. And that is an important piece of equity. We need to invest in different ways in historically Black colleges and universities and our rural community colleges. We need to ensure that people can have jobs working in the semiconductor industry without having a college education. So this is one of the ways in which sort of issues of equity can be built into this new kind of ecosystem where, we're relying on Micron and Intel to really sort of take the football over the line, but government is still playing its role in helping to steward, that endless frontier. Another way I would offer particularly around AI is the recent OMB memo from March on advancing artificial intelligence in government, which is about identifies both rights impacting and safety impacting forms of technology, so places issues of both sort of equity and ethics broadly considered in the center of government use of these technologies, and thinks about government investments and government procurement as a way to steward the frontier of this work. And why is all this important? Because, our highest aspirations for artificial intelligence, for AI for good, including for science, for accessibility, and for things like efficiency, so, improving crop yields through different kinds of AI surveillance. None of these things, so AI, obviously AlphaFold you're familiar with. There was just a release of AlphaFold 3 last week in a new paper in Nature that is predicting not only the structure of proteins, but now also RNA and DNA and more. So this could potentially lead to novel developments and antibiotic resistance, combating plastic pollution by designing plastic-eating enzymes, might lead to better advanced gene editing and the like. Waymap you might be familiar with, which is a London-based AI company that helps impaired people navigate their surroundings, and including in undergrounds and subways and the like. This article from Fast Company was about, as I mentioned, surveillance of crop yields. But none of this AI for good is inevitable. So none of it is, and I think we're more careful about this in the health and medicine space than more generally, none of it is an inherent property of the technology itself. And so all of these things have to be stewarded in lots of different ways, including through the work that folks have done here on the framework. One way of thinking about this, I think it's important that the Biden-Harris administration has done, has been around ARPA-H, the framing of which is specifically around equity, right? And about recognizing that there are market failures, there are products that we need at scale. I think Rob was mentioning, $4 million for the sickle cell anemia Cas9 treatment. How do we create markets for things that don't have markets, and how do we do this at scale? So it's, I think, yet another way that government can really deal with that curve that's happening with business, right? But that's happening for products that aren't necessarily for the public good because they have different and more commercial interests. All right, so having said a little bit about how I think we might want to shift our thinking a bit with regards to moving into having a 21st century conception, like taking Vannevar Bush into the 21st century, or maybe leaving behind the things that we need. Let me say a little bit about the AI equity stack. And for this, I'm going to talk a little bit about the blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. which came out of the White House in October of 2022, a month before ChatGPT was released, and was based on a year of deliberation, consultation with lots of stakeholders, obviously in industry, in civil society, in academia, research, private and higher education research community, but also importantly, folks in the general public. So there were lots of listening sessions and town hall type work as well. The blueprint just makes sort of 5 assertions that will not be a surprise. These are things you've all heard before, and actually the work of the blueprint is to distill these things: that systems should be safe and effective, there should be protections from algorithmic discrimination, some modicum of data privacy that we seem to be inching towards, that you should be have notice of the use of AI, and that there should be alternatives when you're using them. So this is a long document. It's nearly 75 pages long, and I just wanted to tease out that it's more than about the principles. It often, distilling from best practices in industry and the research community, is also trying to offer some examples of how one can do upstream, downstream, and throughstream sort of work thinking about issues of ethics and equity. So each of the principles come with, pose the question, why is it important? What should be expected of the systems? And how can these principles move into practice? I'll just briefly talk about the safe and effective systems. And some of this is in the framework. I think what I would only add is that with AI systems, particularly generative AI systems, advanced AI systems, you're dealing with systems often that are constantly iterating, and I think that the innovation life cycle that the framework presents a little bit suggests that there's a kind of one-time release of a product and then it goes into the cycle, as opposed to that one-time release being like multiply iterative, and I think having to think about what we do about that. So, how do we protect the public from harm in a proactive and ongoing manner, right, to sort of capture this iteration? Consultation, testing, risk identification and mitigation, ongoing monitoring, and clear organizational oversight. How do we avoid inappropriate, low-quality, irrelevant data and the compounded harm of its reuse? We think about relevant and high-quality data. We think about sensitive domains for data. And how do we demonstrate public accountability about the safety of AI systems through independent evaluation and reporting? So, and this also pulls out and names a stakeholder that wasn't really mentioned, for example, in Vannevar Bush's Endless Frontier, which is the public. So the public is sort of implicated in the sense that federal R&D is supposed to do something to help public health, that it's supposed to do something to generate jobs, that STEM's supposed to help educate young people. But there's not really a public in Bush's, I think, imagination of what the sort of science and technology ecosystem is. There was a new edition, a relatively new edition, maybe in the last 6 years, of Science: The Endless Frontier from Princeton that our friend Rush Holt wrote the introduction to, and Rush really kind of teases that out, the lack of a kind of polity and the way that Bush thinks about that. So I would commend that to you. We offered also some best practices. From large companies to startups, industry is providing innovative solutions that allow organizations to mitigate risks, both before deployment and through monitoring over time, including risk assessments, auditing mechanisms, assessment of organizational procedures, dashboards for allowing ongoing monitoring, and the like. So a lot of the good practices are in industry. So again, I'm not trying to counterpose that with government, but it is the case that in industry that these things are often voluntary. And so people can do them when they want to do them. They can show accountability on dashboards when they choose to, and the like. So that I think poses, it just it means that we're living in a different kind of ecosystem, and the work of NIST as well we mentioned. All right, so let me talk about the sort of third issue, I think, and this is from having spent the better part of the last 3 years when I wasn't here with you and Sesti working on this incredible consensus group study, spending a lot of time in the AI developer community and with people working in frontier AI labs. And as some of you probably know Brian Christian's book. They worry quite a lot, and the way that they frame this issue about ethics and innovation, or equity and innovation, is through an alignment problem, right? How do we align AI tools and systems with human values, with democratic values? This is part of the the seedbed or the foundation of things, practices in AI development, like reinforcement learning with human feedback, the sort of sense that keeping humans in the loop of the training data helps with this alignment, right? So there's a very kind of thin description. So my critique of this has been really, how do we get to an alignment that makes sense? And it also is, I think, a critique of our community and how to think about what we assume are shared values, right? So the sort of history of bioethics, assumes from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other things that there's not contention around the very values that we're trying to often align our innovation with. So thick description, of course, we might think of thin description as a way, this boy here winking, is he contracting his right lid? Thick description might say, is it a wink or is it a twitch? Is there something in his eye? Is this intentional, communicative, interpretive? What is the meaning of this behavior? Why was it done? How was it read? And using what social codes? So these are just a lot of different winks. I love the one of Paul Rudd at the bottom. He did an interview with the Australian Broadcasting Company 5 years ago, and they said, you're really known for your winks. Can you show us all the ways that you can wink? And so the point here is that, when you're thinking about sort of AI tools and systems and their outputs and how to align them with human values, the human values piece is very complicated. And I think that we need to, in the space of thinking about ethics and equity, begin to, I think, drill down. And I think that's a lesson that I'm taking from the AI community to bring back to us. I think often in our models, we leave the ethics piece quite a bit static, and we also leave it as the absence of kind of, diabolical harm. So everything else is values aligned, as long as it's not the Tuskegee syphilis study, as long as it's not, research on women in Guatemala with birth control pills against their knowledge. Everything else is imagined to be aligned. So technologically, this is complicated, and we're thinking about, because some of the systems that are formally technologically aligned, so this is from the criminal legal system, are actually societally misaligned. So this is from a groundbreaking 2016 paper, Machine Bias, that was in ProPublica, you might recall, in which there's a recidivism algorithm called Compass, which was shown to be wildly racially disparate in its outcomes, and is still being used in the criminal legal system despite this devastating investigative reporting. But technically, it was aligned, right? Technically, the system was working as it was supposed to work, however, its social outcomes were not aligned. And I think thick alignment forces us as an approach to sort of pose that question around aligned for what, for whom, and what context. Similarly, on misalignment, we might think about the important work of Deb Raji, Joy Buolamwini, and others on facial recognition technology. So this is from a paper that they did in August of 2018 that was looking at the Amazon facial recognition technology that was misaligned variously in the different sort of faces and features that it could identify. I believe Amazon stopped using or making the recognition system. I don't know, Tim might know. But others, IBM, maybe IBM actually stopped using its system. I think Amazon is still using its system. And it's gotten a lot better, right? So, some of it is trending closer to, 98% for all communities. The question becomes, do we want to use facial recognition technology? In what context do we want to use it? So what are the kind of values of that? And beyond, is it technologically accurate? That's the question that I think new and emerging technologies raise for us, potentially when they are dual use or multiple use or general use, as we talk about generative AI. So some considerations are thinking about, I would add to our conversation, a kind of values life cycle, or a kind of contextual way of thinking about values, that these things are often iterative and dynamic. Under what conditions should these AI systems and tools be developed? What community wants them developed or not? Who decides and how, and the like. So these are, I think, first order questions, but they're also, I want to suggest, kind of iterative and dynamic questions that we need to be continually asking around that really wonderful sort of life cycle circle that the framework has built out for us. Okay, just to wrap up, I want to suggest that there's also an incredible place for leadership and voice from this particular community, from the National Academies of Medicine, and from people who come to issues of emerging science and technology from health and medicine, in large part because we're always thinking about people, about patients, about communities, and about users. And those of you who work in other spaces know that that's not common for people who are working on AI innovation and other contexts. They're never thinking about people as a constituency. They're thinking about the data, they're thinking about the sort of technological robustness of the system, but I think that there's a special role and a special voice for this community to play about how do we need to think about implementing equitable innovation in health and medicine? How can we lead the way at a time when biometric tools, facial recognition tools are being used not only in spaces where people use bioethics as a way to constrain or think about the ethics of them, but in a wide range of use cases across society that don't have the same kind of ethical orientation that many in this community as doctors, health professionals, sociologists, and historians bring to that question. We will continue to have this is from December of 2022, a month after ChatGPT was released without notice, without ethical framework to the public. And we will continue to have, given the market imperatives, these kinds of releases. And we need to, I think, continue to think about how we want to think about issues of equity and ethics in a world in which these things are happening in real time, or as they would say in Silicon Valley, in the wild. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm.